Good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me okay? Is this loud enough? All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the monthly Lunch and Learn lecture here at the Eisenhower Presidential Library. My name is Todd Arrington. I'm very happy to be the director here and happy to see you all here getting a great lunch, getting some nutrients, and getting ready for a great program. So thanks for coming out today. As always, we want to thank the Eisenhower Foundation and the Jeff Coate Memorial Foundation for so generously supporting these programs. And before I introduce today's speaker, I'm going to tell you what next month's topic is. The next Lunch and Learn will be Thursday, October 23rd. And October is the month that contains the birthday of the U.S. Navy. So we're going to do a Navy topic next month. Today's the birthday of the U.S. Air Force, by the way, in case anybody's interested in that, even though we're not talking about the Air Force today. But anyway, next month, the topic will be, and yes, I'm serious, the secret history of cats in the U.S. Navy. So that should be a very interesting topic, and I'm sure everybody will learn a lot from that. And the speaker will be Scott Christensen, who is with the U.S. Naval Institute. So that will be next month, Thursday, October 23rd. Today, we are very happy to have with us Dr. Bob Smith. Bob is a graduate of the University of Nebraska and also graduate school at Kansas State University. He's a historian by training and education, and he's the former director, retired, sort of retired, semi-retired director, former director of the Fort Riley Museum complex at Fort Riley, just right up the road in Junction City. And he does a number of other things involving teaching as well here in, as his retirement activity. So he can tell you more about that. But he is going to be talking to us today about veterans and their connections and importance to history. So please welcome Dr. Bob Smith.
Well, thank you all. I'd like to start off by asking, how many veterans do we have here? Okay, great. The reason I ask is I am the son of a World War II veteran. My brother was a Vietnam War veteran. My father-in-law was a World War II veteran. Actually, he was on the ship heading to Japan in 1945 to take part in the Operation Olympic, which was the invasion of Japan. It was believed that there would have been around 1 million casualties suffered by the United States forces in occupying the island of Kyushu. And I've always said that if we didn't drop the bomb and end the war very quickly, I would have had a different wife. My wife's uncle, and we're going to just quiz you here on something real quick, was a World War II veteran and a member of the 5307 composite unit. Does that ring a bell? Anyone? That was Merrill's Marauders in Burma during the Second World War. And so have a lot of military. I am not a veteran. I am a historian. And my talk today is basically, it's my homage to you veterans. Because as a military historian, this is no joke, we wouldn't have a job without you veterans and your stories. And so we would like to enlighten you on some of the veterans that have made my job much easier. As director of the Fort Riley Museums, I had the opportunity to meet a number of veterans. And some of those will be seared in my memory for as long as I live. I met a gentleman, a 90-year-old gentleman, that was the third tank across the bridge at Remagen. And I had asked him, I said, sir, what stupid question, but what were you afraid of? And he said, I wasn't afraid of the Germans. They were throwing everything they could at me, but I could see the Rhine River 40 feet below, and I was in a Sherman tank, and if this bridge collapsed, I was a goner. And so I met a gentleman, a Marine from the Korean War, a veteran of the Korean War, who was one of the members of the Frozen Chosen, the retreat during the Korean War from the Chosen Reservoir. And we had such a wonderful, very emotional talk. And so that was one of the great highlights of my directorship at the museum. My door was always open, so people would always look into my office on the second floor before they went up to the exhibits there. And I always joked that I was part of the exhibit, the museum exhibits sitting there. But they would come and we would talk. And so I had the opportunity to visit with so many veterans. And so today, my talk here is my homage to veterans and how we historians can assist veterans and how we portray veterans. Okay, I begin with a quote, and that quote is, next slide. Thank you. I felt a secret pride swell in my heart when I saw the Star-Spangled Banner waving majestically in the very faces of our implacable adversaries. This was written over 250 years ago by a gentleman by the name of Joseph Plum Martin. Joseph Plum Martin was a Revolutionary War soldier. In the 1830s, he actually wrote his experiences down. And so we have veterans' accounts from the beginning of our country even, and these are so important. Military history cannot depend solely on official histories, though, and we historians in the museum and library here has official histories, morning reports, orders, dispatches, after-action reports, but that's not the whole story. There's more to it than that. These stories are important. Don't get me wrong. We use these stories, but there are so many other stories. Veterans, especially soldiers, regular soldiers, the regular G.I. Jane, G.I. Joe, their wartime accounts provide significant relevancy to history. And this is done through numerous ways: oral histories, memoirs, and yes, even cartoons. And so we are very grateful as historians to have this. And so today I'd like to divide veterans' histories into two categories. And you've got to be nice to me here. I understand, is there anything you can throw at me here? I'm going to talk about senior leadership first and foremost. We have first and foremost memoirs and comments by senior leaders and commanders. If I could have the next slide, please. There we go. Oh, great. Next slide. That's perfect. We can divide those into two categories. Those from senior leaders and those from G.I. Joes, the average soldier in the line. And I firmly believe that I prefer the average soldier. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason. Those factors that are involved in creating history for us historians, they went about a sea change in the 1970s. And there was a book written in the 1970s, and it was written by a guy by the name of John Keegan. And John Keegan wrote The Face of Battle. And The Face of Battle created quite a stir in the historical community, in that The Face of Battle was the story of three battles: the Battle of Agincourt in France in the 15th century, the Battle of Waterloo in the 19th century, and the Battle of the Somme in the 20th century. And he did not rely solely on generals, senior leaders' accounts. He talked about the average soldier. And so in the 1970s, military historians started to look at the average soldier's accounts. And there were three reasons for this, why we started to become interested in the average soldier. One was the GI Bill, because after the Second World War, GIs could come home and set up a new career, and they became very literate, and they started talking about their wartime experiences. There was a social history movement in historiography in the 1970s and 70s, and that was, we want to know about the average guy. We want to know about their weight, their height, what they ate, how they viewed war. And so this was done. And so Keegan started a process in which historians today, major military historians, are starting to look at the average soldier. And I can give you a couple of examples. They're influenced by books by Joseph Galloway and Hal Moore, We Were Soldiers, about the Vietnam experience. Or how about James McPherson and his Civil War stories? He's looking at the average American soldier during the Civil War. And even a British historian, Paddy Griffith. Paddy Griffith has written numerous books about the average soldier in wartime experience. Now I'm going to get in trouble because I'm going to go back to the senior leaders here for just a minute and how they write and how we as historians looked at those all the way up to the 1960s. It was actually called drums and trumpet histories. And most senior leaders, could I have the slide come up on the Battle of, that's great, thank you. This goes all the way back in time. We have a battle here that happened in 1294 BCE by a pharaoh Ramses. And he fought the Hittites at a place called Kadesh. And when he went back to Egypt, he plastered his paintings, his sculpture, all over Egypt. I won a great battle. I don't think so. It wasn't. As historians have looked into this, this was at best a tactical victory, but a strategic defeat. But my point being, senior leaders justify their reasons for their mistakes. We have Napoleon, one of the greatest generals in history. And he remarked in 1800 that he won the Battle of Marengo. Yes, he did, but it was with the help of General Desaix, and he sent the bulletin home. He would issue bulletins back to the people of France that he had won the battle, and failed to mention that Desaix had lost his life winning the battle for him. And it became such a joke in France that the comment was to lie like a French bulletin, coming from the French people. We have George McClellan. He justified his actions at the Battle of Antietam as a strategic victory because guess what? I drove Lee back from Maryland. And then we have John Bell Hood, the Confederate John Bell Hood, who wrote his book, was published posthumously in 1880, and he defended his command decisions outside Atlanta, which he lost, and his disastrous Nashville campaign. So we've got to be careful, and a significant number of senior leaders publish their memoirs to justify their actions. Now, I know I'm here at the Eisenhower Center. I like Ike, and I've read his memoirs, and Ike is pretty level-headed. I also like, next slide, I also like the memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant. They are some of the finest works of literature, not only memoirs, but literature out there. And it's interesting that he wrote this while he was suffering from terminal lung cancer, or throat cancer, dying just days after he had finished it. And what's really, really interesting about his memoirs is that yet today, if you look at the Chief of Staff of the United States Army's reading list, the memoirs of Ulysses S. Grant are consistently on that list. However, I've kind of taken a tack towards really kind of ragging on the senior leadership. But let's talk a little bit about Joseph Plum Martin for a minute, the average soldier, whom I'm interested in. And Joseph Plum Martin wrote an account in 1830 about his time during the American Revolution. He served interestingly, as a militia officer, sort of what we would call National Guard today, for a Connecticut regiment. And he was involved in the 1776 New York campaign. And he saw the hardships, the trials, the tribulations, and he saw that George Washington, which we hold up as a great general, Washington was learning his craft and being beaten consistently. But what Martin did is, I've had enough of Army life, and finished his enlistment, but couldn't get away from it. And in 1778, he joins the Continental Army, and he remains with the Continental Army, ending up as a sergeant in 1783. And the interesting things, the human side of Joseph Plum Martin, if you will just give me an opportunity to read a few of his remarks here. And I'm going to have to translate because it's kind of interesting. There's some old language here. And so, but he wrote this with humor, but he also talked about the trials and tribulations of a soldier. But one of the areas that really struck me was he wrote in 1778, accordingly, 2 of the club, meaning his unit, went out shortly and returned with a Hessian. We were fighting the Hessians, they were the mercenaries, Hessian goose. I had a professor in graduate school that served in the United States Army during the Second World War, and he told me I can identify with this. There's some relevancy because he said every chicken in France was a Nazi, and therefore they had to exterminate them. So I can understand that Joseph Plum Martin is talking about this, but he had the goose. Next difficulty, how to pluck it. We concluded at last to pick her over the fire and let that take care of the feathers. We dressed her and then divided her amongst us. If I remember rightly, I got 1 wing. After this sumptuous repast, he's being a little snarky here, I lay down and slept as well as the gnawing stomach would permit. This is as close as you can get to wartime experiences. That he talks, and generals fairly, and senior leaders, they deal with grand strategy and things, but this is the down to earth, this is the human relevance to it. Plum also provided the historians with a verification of a very famous fact. And he talks about the Battle of Monmouth in 1778. And he says, one little incident happened during the heat of the cannonade, which I was eyewitness to, and which I think would be unpardonable not to mention. Now, this is going to be the real clue for everyone. A woman whose husband belonged to the artillery and was then attached to a piece in the engagement, attended with her husband at a piece the whole time. Anybody got the clue yet? Not yet? Exactly. While in the act of reaching for a cartridge and having one of her feet as far before as the other as she could step, a cannon shot from the enemy passed directly between her legs, carrying away all the lower part of her petticoat and looking at it with unconcern. She observed, it was lucky it did not pass a little higher. So these little incidents allow the historian to kind of humanize their story rather than having the grand tactics. And I think that's the important thing for historians, to make that connection with us Americans. I want to turn now to the next slide. And this guy is not a veteran, but he was a veteran. I want to talk about Ernie Pyle, the GI's journalist, as he was called. Whoop, there's Molly. Next slide. I'm sorry. I do this all the time. I get ahead of myself. Ernie Pyle. Ernie Pyle, soldier's correspondent. Pyle. And I've read his memoirs, and he did not want to stay around the headquarters. He actually said at one time during the fighting in North Africa that he went back to Iran, in Algeria, to a hotel. And he hadn't slept in a bed for weeks. And he got into the bed and he said, you know, I felt guilty that I was sleeping in a bed when I left all those soldiers out of the field. And so he went back with them. And he ate, slept, and he remained on the front lines with the GIs. And the interesting thing for us historians is he wrote about the ordinary GI and what he went through and what he experienced during the Second World War. He wrote of the everyday realities of the American soldier in combat. And basically, Pyle would say many times that the soldiers would go up to them and write home what my mother and father would want to know. And many times he was even asked, would you stick my name in so they know I'm all right? Pyle's book, Here Is Your War, is worthwhile reading. And even Eleanor Roosevelt, when she met Pyle during the war, said, quote, he has told a story of our army as it is, of its life, day by day. I will give you a vivid picture to anyone who has never been to the front. And then she ended with what we historians really think is a very prescient comment. Historians will turn to this book to explain the kind of war these men fought. And one of the most poignant columns that Pyle wrote was in January of 1944 while campaigning in Italy. And if you'll permit me to read just a little of this, it is the eulogy for Captain Henry T. Wasco. He was killed in Italy. He was killed in Italy and his body was brought down on a mule, strapped to a mule, because they were fighting in the Apennine Mountains. He begins this account, Pyle begins this account with, in this war, I have known a lot of officers who were loved and respected by soldiers under them, but never crossed the trail of any man as beloved as Captain Henry T. Wasco of Belton, Texas. He was very young, only in his middle 20s, but he carried in him a sincerity and gentleness that made people want to be guided by him. After my own father, a sergeant wrote, he came next. And this column was sent, and I have it here. I won't take the time to read the whole thing, but it will make you very emotional about what war is and how the American soldier fought during the Second World War. Historians turn to Pyle. We historians turn to Pyle in World War II because he could be counted on to tell us the unvarnished truth about the veterans and how they lived, fought, and died. And so we honor Ernie Pyle and his memory. We historians, I checked my watch because we historians, in our contract, we have an obligation to keep everyone as long as possible. Otherwise, we kind of lose our standing in history. So, but anyway, with that sort of very somber note, I want to turn to a lighter side and someone you probably wouldn't consider, but we historians love and consider in telling us the GI story. And that's Phil Malden. And Bill Malden was a product of the Great Depression. He joined the Army in 1940. And the reason he joined the Army in 1940 is because it gave him 3 hots and a cot. It kept him from being homeless and hungry. He signed up with the 45th Infantry Division. And he basically said, I want to drive trucks. I don't want to have anything to do with the infantry because they walk. And I want to drive trucks. So he was assigned to the 120th Quartermaster Regiment, 45th Infantry Division. And when he got there, they wouldn't let him drive trucks. And he said his time in the States prior to the war was spent doing KP and latrine duty. He met a lieutenant colonel, Walter Harrison, and Walter Harrison was in the intelligence section of the 45th Division, and he knew that Bill Malden drew cartoons, and he thought this would be a great morale builder. And so he drew these cartoons, and he sketched the life of the ordinary soldier, the trials and tribulations, the mundane, the hurry up and wait of the American soldier. And then when war came, he went with the 45th Division. And while he was with the 45th Division in North Africa and in Italy, he drew Willie and Joe, some of my favorite characters. And I just love these here. I don't know if you can see those cartoons from here. Can you read them? They're just priceless. They're priceless. My first one, 2 GIs are under a tank, a German tank, and it says Able Fox 5, Able Fox. I've got a target for you, but you got to be patient. The second one really, really hits home for the historian. And basically, I'm going to paraphrase. It says, Joe, yesterday you saved my life, and I said I'd repay you. Here's my last pair of dry socks. That's the GI. That's the GI. And the final one is, I don't know if that's Willie or Joe, but one of them's in a mud puddle. And he basically says, no, Joe, I don't want your puddle. I'll find my own, a clean one. And so Willie and Joe basically symbolize through the Second World War the working class draftees that actually inhabited the United States Army, and they made up what we call the demographic makeup of the Army during World War II. His Willie and Joe were featured in Stars and Stripes. And Pyle noted, Ernie Pyle commented about Bill Malden, and he said, Sergeant Bill Malden appears to us over here to be the finest cartoonist the war produced. And that's not merely because his cartoons are funny, but because they're also terribly grim and real. So we know the lot of the American soldier. Sad to say, not everybody appreciated Bill Malden, though. Patton threatened to cut off circulation of Stars and Stripes in his Third Army during the campaign in Europe if Malden's cartoons remained in the paper. He thought that Willie and Joe did not exemplify the American soldier, the dog-faced, the unshaven, the dirty, the combat-weary soldier. The good news, and I'm happy to say, Patton didn't win his fight because Ike intervened. And Ike intervened with a general order. And Ike's general order was to all United States Army forces not to tamper with Malden's cartoons. For the rest of the war, Willie and Joe entertained the GIs. By the time of his death, Bill Malden's death in 2003, he received over 10,000 cards and letters, and they were from veterans saying, "You got it right." Malden showed the trials, tribulations of the average GI. And that's what I want to honor the veterans here today, because we understand, at least this historian understands, the trials and tribulations, even though we have not experienced them. We're kind of weenies. We just write about it. I want to close today. Am I on time, guys? Good. I want to close today by actually saying that I, as a historian, am grateful to the veterans who contributed their stories and service and keeping history alive and relevant, especially the history of the average American citizen. If we didn't have those relevant stories, I guess I'd be out of a job. And I really enjoy telling the history. I want to finish by quoting one last slide. I have two slides, actually. Max Hastings, and he's a British historian. And his latest book here is Soldiers, Great Stories of War and Peace. And Hastings said in his introduction to the book, the purpose of his writing this book, and he has written 29 books, is to sound notes that ring true to the warrior's condition. He's going to tell about the warrior's story. Like Hastings, it's my contention that those ordinary soldiers provide a more complete picture. We can take those senior leaders' reports, we can take those official reports, but we can take those reports that came from the ordinary soldier and kind of fold them together to make a more complete picture. And I think that's invaluable to a historian in their ability to tell a compelling story. I want to thank you. And we have one more slide. And I'm a little whimsical here. I think those new replacements are getting smaller all the time. So Snoopy is saying, Willie and Joe, my heroes, happy Veterans Day. So to all you veterans, to my father, to my father-in-law, to my wife's uncle, to my brother, I want to say thank you for your service. And I hope you enjoyed this. And please, they told me there was no apples or anything or tomatoes to throw at me. So at least I will take, if you throw a cookie, I'll take it. So I'm open to questions. Yes, ma'am.
I have great interest in Civil War.
Yes, ma'am.
And it seemed like it was the general scared. They made it sound like it did so well because they were scared that they'd be reprimanded if they didn't come through. And so they polished it up.
Did the question go through about that they were generals? The Civil War lady is interested in Civil War history, and the question is that generals justified their existence because they were scared, because they screwed. I'm putting words in your mouth. They screwed up all the time. And basically, yes, they justified their existence and why they were there. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that I would offer. One is that the American Civil War was the first war, which we call modern war, in which generals were now commanding large numbers of troops. And they were covering, and they had never done this before. Of course, we had the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, but never troops in that magnitude, that size armies. And so they were feeling their way through. My hero, Ulysses S. Grant, he screws up. He screws up big time at Belmont in 1861, and he screws up at Shiloh in 1862. Grant, though, basically says in his memoirs, I screwed up, but I also learned some lessons. And I used those lessons later on. And so it was kind of like I would recommend to you, though, James McPherson's books, okay? And let me throw you a curve. Patty Griffin who's no longer with us. He's a British historian, but he studied American Civil War soldiers. And he talks about Civil War soldiers in seeing the elephant, first-time soldiers in seeing combat and their reactions. And so Patty Griffith, he's a big tactical guy. He talks a lot about tactics and weapons, but he talks about the American soldier. And so we're lucky to have had him. Yes, ma'am. All I can say, I'm bound by a certain, but we're staying, we're open. Don't worry. That's what I mean. We are open. No, it's the Army's going through a lot of transitional issues, but the Army, the museum at Fort Riley is open. Oh, yes. If you'll permit me, I spent 10 years putting those museums together. And, oh, by all means. Oh, yes. I call those, I would take out my phone and go, you want to see my baby pictures? And I would have my museum. So, yes, please, by all means. And it's free. And we're remaining open. And, like I said, I joke, but I retired a year ago. But I call it phased retirement because I'm going to be out there tomorrow with folks from the Command and General Staff College, and I have a number of tours lined up because my staff says, would you mind doing the tours? I guess they think I was good. I don't know. They don't, that's true. They don't want to do them. I want to introduce my wife. I'm embarrassing her, but she is my critic. She is my critic. She basically said, I have this wonderful speech written. And she says, don't read it, just talk. Just talk. So I did. Anybody that's interested, though, I have a copy of this. This is Ernie Pyle's Death of Captain Wasco. And I would highly recommend you Google it or look into, you can even hear the audio version, but it is one of the most poignant obituaries written about a soldier dying in combat. And it is just, it's just really something. It's really emotional, but it's really, and this is 80 years ago or more. I always laugh. I'm a historian and not a mathematician, and the reason I'm a historian is because I'm a lousy mathematician. So, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hey, Bob, we got a question from online.
Okay.
And if you would repeat the question, our hand on mic that we normally give to people.
Okay.
Next question isn't for you. Is there any one veteran story that has deeply impacted you and the work you've done?
Oh, impacted me. Well, I have a confession to make. I worked 18 years for the United States Army. But by training, I'm not an American historian. I went to the dark side. I'm a British historian. My staff always said that I was a traitor, because I'd say, God save the Queen and things. But that impacted me, and yeah. But Harry Smith had an incredible career. He was like, do you remember the John Jakes books about American history that were in the 70s on TV? That they always happened to be where the action happened. And as a kid, I read books called You Were There, and they always happened to be where signing the Declaration of Independence. Well, Harry Smith happened to be everywhere, and he wrote about this. And to give you an example, Harry Smith in the early 19th century was with the Duke of Wellington fighting the French in Spain. And he was there up until 1814. And then he was assigned to go to the United States because we had a dust up with Great Britain called the War of 1812. And he was at the burning of Washington. And he was at the death of General Ross outside of Baltimore. And the British command decided, Harry, you need to take General Ross's body back to England for burial. So he gets on a boat and sails back to Great Britain for burial. When he arrives there, he's given a new assignment. And he's with General Pakenham, and he's going to New Orleans. And he goes to New Orleans, and it's incredible. He's at New Orleans, and guess what? Pakenham bites the dust. Harry, you're going to take Pakenham's body back to Britain. And so he goes back to Britain. And this is early 1815. And he gets back to Britain, and guess where he's sent next? He's sent to Belgium, and he's at the Battle of Waterloo. So he's in all of these incredible events, and he writes about them. And then his military career isn't over. He goes to South Africa, and he participates in what we call the Xhosa Wars, wars against native South Africans. And he's there. And when he's done there, guess what? He's not done. He's sent to India. And he is in what we call the first Sikh War in northern India. And he finally gets back to Great Britain in the early 1850s. And what happens? I want to be, we're going to have a war with Russia here, the Crimean War. I want to be in command. And his story ends because they said, you're too old, you've seen too much. And it's kind of darn. But anyway, I've read his memoirs, and I actually put a chapter about him in my dissertation because he was such an interesting guy, and his memoirs are just riveting. It's not an American. I would say the most riveting memoir for Americans that I like is Ernie Pyle, because Ernie Pyle was there and saw it. And I will end with this, and I know I'm going long-winded, but I'll end with this, is my father was a World War II veteran. He never talked about his service, which a lot of veterans don't do, until the last years of his life. And as a historian, I'm still kicking myself. I did not write his stories down. And so, please, if you are a veteran and you have a story, leave something for generations, because it will help. These gentlemen over here will be very happy to have those stories and those memoirs, because we don't want them lost to time. Thank you so much, though. I really enjoyed this. I hope nothing was thrown at me, so I'll get off the stage.